It was a postcard of towering majesty, a verdant cathedral where ancient sentinels scraped the sky. Yet for one young soul, the Redwood National Park would become a tomb, a living crypt shrouded in mystery for a decade. 10 years vanished into the dappled light filtering through the canopy. 10 years of agonizing questions and fruitless searches, until an unexpected discovery shattered the pervasive silence and unearthed a truth far stranger and more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The initial reports were deceptively simple, a familiar refrain in the annals of missing persons. A tourist, alone, venturing into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. But what truly transpired amidst those colossal trees, beneath the watchful eyes of nature's oldest giants, would defy every conventional explanation. This was not a simple case of getting lost. This was a narrative woven with threads of isolation, desperation, and an almost unbelievable feat of human endurance, culminating in a revelation that sent shivers down the spine of even the most hardened investigators. The story begins, as many do, with a flicker of youthful optimism. Evelyn Reed, a bright-eyed adventurer from a bustling East Coast city, had embarked on what she envisioned as a spiritual pilgrimage to connect with the raw power of nature. She was 24, armed with a backpack, a camera, and an unshakable belief in the restorative magic of the wild. Her last known communication was a cheerful text to her sister, detailing her excitement about hiking a secluded trail deep within the Redwood National Park, a path less traveled, promising unparalleled solitude and breathtaking views. This was the summer of 2013, a time before the ubiquity of satellite tracking devices for personal use. A simpler era where a GPS watch was still a novelty, rather than a necessity. Evelyn, like countless others before her, trusted in her own capabilities and the perceived benevolence of the natural world. She was meticulous in her planning, or so it seemed, carrying maps, a compass, and ample supplies for a multi-day trek. Yet, within days, her meticulous plans unraveled into a terrifying unknown. Her rental car, a nondescript sedan, was found abandoned in a remote parking lot, a silent testament to her departure into the dense forest. The car itself offered no clues, no signs of struggle, just the quiet hum of an absence that grew louder with each passing hour. It was a perfectly ordinary vehicle, containing perfectly ordinary possessions, but its stillness in that desolate lot spoke volumes of an abrupt, unplanned disappearance. The local authorities were initially optimistic. People often underestimated the sheer scale of the redwoods, they reasoned. Getting disoriented was common. Search and rescue operations were launched with commendable swiftness. Helicopters sliced through the immense air above the canopy, their rotors a rhythmic thud against the ancient silence. Ground crews, a mix of seasoned park rangers and dedicated volunteers, fanned out, their voices echoing through the fog-draped groves, calling out Evelyn's name. Dogs, their keen senses honed for tracking, scoured the forest floor, noses to the earth, but the dense undergrowth and the pervasive scent of pine and damp earth proved a formidable adversary. The scale of the search was immense, covering hundreds of square miles of unforgiving terrain. Every fallen log was examined, every ravine descended, every hidden glade explored. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, but Evelyn Reed remained elusive. Her family, distraught and desperate, arrived from across the country, their hopes slowly eroding with each passing day of futility. They joined the searchers, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion, their calls of Evelyn, swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. The narrative of her disappearance began to solidify into a tragic but familiar pattern. another soul lost to the immense, untamed beauty of the redwoods. Speculations ran wild, fueled by the vacuum of information. Had she encountered a wild animal, taken a catastrophic fall, or more sinisterly, had she met with foul play in the secluded depths of the forest? Each theory was considered, weighed, and ultimately dismissed due to a complete lack of evidence. There were no tracks, no discarded belongings beyond what she presumably carried, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Evelyn Reed had simply vanished, absorbed by the ancient woods without a trace. The vastness of the park, once her intended sanctuary, had become an impenetrable fortress guarding its secrets. The silence of the redwoods, once a balm, now felt like a mocking, suffocating shroud. After months of exhaustive effort, the official search was scaled back, eventually becoming a cold case, a faded poster on a bulletin board, a haunting memory for those who had poured their hearts into finding her. Evelyn Reed became another statistic, another name whispered with sorrow and regret, another unsolved mystery swallowed by the unforgiving maw of the wild. Her family, though devastated, eventually returned home, carrying with them a grief that would forever be a part of their lives, a hollow ache that time could never truly heal. They held onto a sliver of hope, a desperate, irrational belief that somehow, somewhere, Evelyn might still be alive, but logic dictated otherwise. The redwoods, after all, rarely relinquished their captives. Then, 10 years later, a ghost in the machine of the wilderness stirred. A team of botanists, conducting a routine survey of rare lichen species in an extremely remote, virtually unexplored section of the park, a section so dense and inhospitable that it was rarely traversed even by seasoned rangers, stumbled upon an anomaly. It wasn't a natural formation, it was an imposition, a stark testament to human presence in a place where human presence should have been impossible. Deep within a grove, hidden behind a curtain of ferns and colossal redwood roots, they discovered what appeared to be a crude, almost organic structure. It was built into the base of a truly massive ancient redwood, its entrance almost completely concealed by moss and overhanging branches. At first glance, it might have been mistaken for an animal den or a particularly unusual natural hollow. But a closer inspection revealed the unmistakable hallmarks of human ingenuity, however primitive. There were carefully placed branches, interwoven with thick vines, forming a rudimentary wall. A small dark opening, just large enough for a person to squeeze through, beckoned them inward. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of unease, compelled them to investigate further. What they found inside was a shocking tableau, a time capsule of an unimaginable existence. It was a tiny, cramped space, barely large enough for one person to lie down, yet it was meticulously organized. There was a makeshift bed of dried leaves and pine needles, a collection of scavenged berries and nuts, and a crude array of tools, sharpened sticks, a broken knife blade, and a collection of smooth river stones. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp wood and something else, something metallic and slightly acrid, a smell that spoke of long-term human habitation. On a rough-hewn shelf, among the foraging tools, lay a small, tarnished silver pendant, a delicate, intricate piece of jewelry, its design familiar to those who had followed the missing persons case a decade earlier. It was identical to the pendant Evelyn Reed had been wearing in her last known photograph, a gift from her grandmother. The botanist, shaken by the discovery, immediately contacted park authorities. The initial shock quickly gave way to a surge of grim recognition. Could this truly be it? Could this crude shelter, hidden for so long, be connected to Evelyn Reed's disappearance? The implications were staggering, almost unbelievable. Had she survived all this time, living a solitary feral existence in the heart of the ancient forest? Or was this merely a grim monument to her final desperate days? The arrival of law enforcement and forensic teams transformed the serene Redwood Grove into a hub of intense activity. The site was meticulously cordoned off, every inch examined for clues. The sense of anticipation was palpable, a mixture of dread and a faint, almost forbidden hope. What secrets would this forgotten sanctuary yield? As forensic experts carefully processed the scene, a truly astonishing revelation emerged. Among the meager belongings, tucked away beneath a pile of leaves, they found a small spiral-bound notebook. Its pages were brittle and water-damaged. The ink faded in many places, but the handwriting was unmistakably Evelyn Reed's. This wasn't merely a shelter. It was a testament, a chronicle of 10 years of survival, a decade-long whisper from the wild. The notebook contained entries detailing her initial disorientation, her desperate attempts to find her way back to the trail, and then the chilling realization that she was truly lost. She wrote of the profound loneliness, the gnawing fear, the constant struggle against the elements and the relentless hunger. But amidst the despair, there was also a remarkable narrative of adaptation, of learning to identify edible plants, to track small game, to build fires with friction, to find and purify water. It was a harrowing account of resilience, of a human spirit refusing to be extinguished. The initial theory of a swift, tragic death was instantly, dramatically overturned. Evelyn Reed had not merely vanished, she had survived. But the narrative within the notebook took a darker, more perplexing turn. It spoke not only of the struggle for survival against nature, but of an escalating, insidious threat, a presence she sensed in the periphery, an unsettling feeling of being watched. Her entries grew increasingly paranoid, describing strange noises in the night, the inexplicable movement of objects in her camp, and the unsettling sensation of eyes upon her from the impenetrable darkness of the surrounding forest. Was it the psychological toll of isolation, a mind slowly unraveling under the immense pressure of solitude? Or was there something more, something truly sinister at play in this remote corner of the redwoods? The discovery of the notebook was a seismic shift in the investigation, transforming a decade-old missing persons case into an active, chilling mystery. It raised far more questions than it answered. Where was Evelyn now? And who, or what, had been her unseen tormentor? The sense of gravity around the site intensified, the serene beauty of the redwoods now tinged with a palpable aura of unease. The initial hope of finding Evelyn alive, however faint, was now intertwined with a growing sense of dread, a chilling premonition that the full story of her 10 years in the wilderness was far from a simple tale of survival. The revelation of Evelyn Reed's survival for 10 years in the brutal embrace of the Redwood National Park sent shockwaves through the investigative team. The narrative contained within her tattered notebook wasn't merely a testament to human resilience. It was a disturbing chronicle of a mind under siege, wrestling with the dual threats of the wilderness and something far more sinister. The entries, initially focused on the raw struggle for sustenance and shelter, gradually morphed into a descent into paranoia, hinting at an unseen presence. She meticulously detailed her evolving routines, her ingenious methods for foraging, trapping small animals, and maintaining a fragile existence. She described the profound silence of the ancient forest, broken only by the whispers of the wind through the colossal trees and the rustling of unseen creatures. But then the tone shifted. "I hear them," one entry read, the handwriting more agitated. "Footsteps sometimes, or something moving just beyond the light of my fire. I tell myself it's deer, elk, but the pattern, it's too deliberate." Another chilling passage. "My supplies moved, just slightly. A stone I left by the entrance. Not there, or placed differently. Someone knows I'm here. Someone is watching." Her words painted a picture of a woman increasingly isolated, not just from civilization, but from the comfort of rational thought, trapped in a psychological battle against an unseen adversary she couldn't definitively identify. Was it the creeping tendrils of psychosis brought on by extreme solitude? Or was her fear justified, a chilling premonition of a genuine threat lurking in the shadows? The forensic team, now equipped with this disturbing new context, redoubled their efforts. The tree cabin, once seen as a marvel of survival, was now viewed as a potential crime scene. Every piece of debris, every disturbed patch of earth, every faint impression became a crucial puzzle piece. They widened their search perimeter, no longer merely looking for remains, but for any sign of another individual, any evidence to corroborate Evelyn's increasingly desperate journal entries. It was in this intensified search, a few hundred yards from the cabin, partially concealed by a dense thicket of rhododendrons, that a second, equally disturbing discovery was made. It was a crude, almost skeletal lean-to, a temporary shelter far less substantial than Evelyn's, constructed from broken branches and interwoven leaves. Unlike Evelyn's meticulously organized dwelling, this one appeared abandoned, almost hastily vacated. The air around it held a different scent, a faint, acrid odor, mingling with the earthy smell of the forest. Inside the rudimentary shelter, the scene was unsettling. There were remnants of a small extinguished fire, a few discarded animal bones, and a handful of unusual objects. A rusted, antique arrowhead, meticulously chipped from flint, strikingly out of place in a modern wilderness, and a small, damaged handheld radio antenna, its tip bent and corroded. The items themselves were puzzling, but their proximity to Evelyn's cabin, combined with the nature of her journal entries, ignited a terrifying possibility. Had Evelyn not been alone? Had her perceived tormentor been real? The arrowhead, in particular, raised immediate red flags. Its design was ancient, suggesting a craftsmanship from centuries past. Yet it appeared recently used, its edges still sharp. It was not a common souvenir. It spoke of a primitive, almost primal existence. And the radio antenna? Its significance was less clear, but it hinted at some form of communication, perhaps a desperate attempt to connect, or perhaps something more sinister. The discovery of the second camp completely altered the trajectory of the investigation. The focus shifted from a sole survivor to a potential encounter, a prolonged, terrifying interaction between Evelyn Reed and an unknown individual. The implication that someone else had been living in the extreme isolation of the redwoods, actively observing Evelyn, was chilling. Who was this phantom presence? And what was their connection to Evelyn's long, silent ordeal? As the investigators grappled with these new questions, a third, even more grotesque discovery was made, further cementing the horrifying trajectory of the case. Deep within a shallow, hastily dug grave, covered by a cairn of stones and overgrown with moss, approximately a quarter of a mile from Evelyn's tree cabin, they found human remains. They were skeletal, almost completely consumed by the relentless march of time and the elements. but undeniably human. The position of the bones suggested a hasty, disrespectful burial. There was no clothing, no personal effects, just the stark, grim reality of a human life ended and discarded in the vast indifference of the forest. The initial forensic analysis, conducted with painstaking care, revealed a devastating truth. The remains belonged to a male, likely in his late 30s to early 50s. More importantly, embedded within the ribcage, a small, dark object was found. It was the rusted, antique arrowhead, precisely matching the one found in the abandoned lean-to. The grim jigsaw puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture of violence and desperation. The man had been killed, and the arrowhead was the murder weapon. The discovery of the remains and the weapon solidified a terrifying hypothesis. Evelyn Reed had not been merely surviving. She had been trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse with another individual, an antagonist whose identity remained shrouded in mystery. The narrative in her journal, once dismissed as potential paranoia, now resonated with a chilling, undeniable truth. The footsteps, the feeling of being watched, the moved objects, they were not figments of a desperate mind. They were the terrifying reality of a stalker in the wilderness. The emotional landscape of the investigation became fraught with a grim determination. The search was no longer for a missing person, but for a killer, or perhaps for a victim who had been forced to become a killer in a desperate act of self-preservation. The question of Evelyn's whereabouts now held a new, agonizing weight. Had she, too, fallen victim to this unseen menace? Or had she, in a moment of unimaginable terror and desperation, fought back and survived, only to vanish again, leaving behind a trail of clues that only now, 10 years later, were finally being understood? The ancient redwoods, once revered for their tranquil beauty, now seemed to loom with an almost sentient malevolence, guarding a secret far darker than anyone could have imagined. The stillness of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the weight of unseen struggles, unheard screams, and the ghost of a desperate hunt. This wasn't merely a case of a tourist gone missing. It was a saga of protracted terror, a brutal struggle for survival culminating in a violent confrontation, all played out in the profound, indifferent silence of one of nature's grandest cathedrals. The full, horrifying truth of Evelyn Reed's 10 years in the wilderness was only just beginning to unfurl, piece by agonizing piece. With the discovery of the male remains and the antique arrowhead, the narrative surrounding Evelyn Reed's disappearance twisted into a truly horrifying new shape. Her journal entries, once interpreted as possible descent into madness due to isolation, were now seen as chillingly accurate observations of a prolonged, terrifying ordeal. The team now understood that Evelyn had been stalked, hunted, and likely terrorized by another individual in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The initial forensic analysis confirmed that the man had died from a severe wound, consistent with the type of antique arrowhead found embedded in his ribcage. But who was this mysterious aggressor? And what was his connection to Evelyn? The meticulous examination of the second makeshift camp provided some tantalizing, albeit cryptic, clues. The discarded animal bones suggested a subsistence lifestyle. One lived off the land, much like Evelyn's, but perhaps with a more predatory edge. The rusted handheld radio antenna, initially a perplexing anomaly, began to suggest a form of communication. However rudimentary or desperate, was it an attempt to reach the outside world, or a tool for some unknown darker purpose? Investigators theorized that the man had likely been a survivalist, an individual who had purposefully retreated from society, choosing a life of extreme isolation in the heart of the redwoods. Such individuals, while rare, were not unheard of, but the nature of his death and Evelyn's desperate journal entries painted a far more sinister picture than mere reclusion. This was not a hermit seeking peace. This was an aggressor. The immediate priority became identifying the male remains. Dental records were painstakingly compared, and DNA samples were sent to labs for analysis. The process was slow, arduous, and fraught with the challenges of working with remains that had been exposed to the elements for a decade. While awaiting definitive identification, the team intensified their search for Evelyn herself. If she had survived this horrifying encounter, where had she gone? Had she fled in terror, deeper into the labyrinthine forest, or had she somehow found a way out? The search parameters expanded even further, pushing into areas previously deemed too remote or inaccessible. The hope of finding her alive, though still incredibly faint, now carried a new, urgent dimension. The discovery of the male body presented Evelyn not just as a victim, but as a potential survivor who had been forced to defend herself in the most brutal of circumstances. The thought that she might have been capable of such an act, after 10 years of unimaginable hardship, spoke volumes of the raw primal instincts that extreme survival could awaken. The investigation then received a crucial breakthrough. DNA analysis confirmed the identity of the deceased. His name was Arthur Art Finch, a former park ranger who had been fired for erratic behavior and insubordination almost 15 years prior to Evelyn's disappearance. Finch had been known for his extreme survivalist views, his disdain for modern society, and a deep, almost obsessive knowledge of the Redwood National Park's most remote regions. He had, in essence, vanished off the grid after his dismissal, becoming a phantom legend among a few long-serving park staff, whispered about as the one who went native. This revelation shattered the initial assumptions about Evelyn's tormentor. Art Finch wasn't a random stranger. He was someone intimately familiar with the very wilderness that had become Evelyn's prison. His past erratic behavior, combined with his survivalist tendencies, painted a chilling portrait of a man capable of sustained stalking and psychological manipulation. He would have known the hidden trails, the secret springs, the perfect vantage points from which to observe an unsuspecting individual. The discovery of Finch's identity transformed the case from a mystery of unknown aggressors to a confrontation with a known, albeit profoundly disturbed, individual. The pieces of the puzzle began to interlock with horrifying clarity. Finch, perhaps driven by his disillusionment with society, had found in Evelyn an unwitting subject for some twisted, prolonged experiment in dominance and terror. His presence, his subtle movements, his silent observation, all described in Evelyn's journal, were not the product of a deranged mind, but the deliberate, calculated actions of a predator. The radio antenna found in his camp, once enigmatic, now suggested a further layer of his unsettling nature. Was he attempting to monitor distress frequencies, listening for other lost souls? Or was it a crude form of entertainment, a way to listen to the outside world he had so vehemently rejected, all while enacting his private reign of terror within the redwoods? The theory that emerged was grim. Evelyn, initially lost and struggling, had unwittingly stumbled into Finch's secluded domain. Instead of offering help, Finch, in his deranged state, had chosen to observe, to play a prolonged psychological game, gradually tightening the net around his unsuspecting victim. Her survival, her growing resourcefulness, might have been a source of perverse fascination for him, until the moment came when the game escalated, culminating in a violent confrontation. The crucial question remained: where was Evelyn? Had she, after killing Finch in an act of desperate self-defense, succumbed to her own wounds or to the unforgiving wilderness? Or had she, armed with the knowledge that her tormentor was gone, found a way to escape her decade-long prison? The emotional weight within the search parties became almost unbearable. The Redwoods, once magnificent and awe-inspiring, now felt like a vast, silent witness to a decade of terror and a brutal, hidden struggle. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig, every patch of unusual ground cover became a source of intense scrutiny, infused with the hope of finding Evelyn, but also the dread of what further horrors the forest might reveal. The focus of the search shifted from finding a trace of her original disappearance to uncovering the aftermath of her violent encounter with Art Finch. The investigators, driven by a new sense of urgency and a deeper understanding of the horror Evelyn had endured, vowed not to rest until the full truth of her 10 years in the wilderness and her ultimate fate was finally brought to light. This was no longer just about a missing person. It was about rectifying a decade of injustice and silence, giving voice to a story that had been buried deep within the heart of the ancient forest. The identification of Art Finch as Evelyn's tormentor and the probable victim in the shallow grave brought a chilling clarity to the decade-old mystery. The ghost of Evelyn Reed's paranoid journal entries now had a name, a face, and a history. Finch, the disgraced park ranger turned survivalist, had not merely stumbled upon Evelyn. He had actively stalked her, turning her desperate struggle for survival into a prolonged, twisted game of cat and mouse. The forensic analysis of Finch's remains, coupled with Evelyn's increasingly desperate writings, painted a harrowing picture of her last known days. It suggested a brutal confrontation, a moment where Evelyn, pushed to the absolute brink, had fought back. The antique arrowhead, identified as the murder weapon, spoke of a primitive, desperate struggle, a fight not just for survival, but for her very sanity against a relentless, unseen predator. The scene of Finch's burial, hasty and concealed, hinted at Evelyn's profound exhaustion and fear in the aftermath of the encounter. Had she simply buried him to remove the threat, or to ensure that no one else would suffer his perverse attention? The emotional toll of such an act, after 10 years of isolation and terror, was almost unimaginable. With Finch's identity confirmed, the investigators broadened their inquiry into his past, searching for any other possible connections, any other victims or incidents that might shed light on his depraved activities in the wilderness. They found fragmented reports of other strange occurrences in the park from years past. Hikers reporting unnerving feelings of being watched, small personal items vanishing from campsites, unexplained noises. At the time, these had been dismissed as typical wilderness anxieties or minor mischief. Now, they took on a terrifying new significance, pointing to a pattern of behavior that stretched back years, with Evelyn Reed being his most enduring and ultimately his final victim. The central question remained: where was Evelyn? The theory that she had killed Finch in self-defense, while providing a degree of grim satisfaction, still left a gaping void in the narrative. Had she escaped the Redwoods? Or had the ordeal, even after her aggressor was neutralized, proven too much to overcome? The search teams, now driven by a powerful sense of resolution and a yearning to bring Evelyn home, intensified their efforts, focusing on outward-bound routes from the site of the confrontation. They scoured creek beds for signs of passage, examined rock faces for climbing attempts, and meticulously combed through every potential hiding place within a vastly expanded perimeter. The scale of the redwood forest, once an adversary in itself, now felt like a silent accomplice to Finch's terror, and perhaps to Evelyn's subsequent disappearance. As days turned into weeks, the hope of finding Evelyn alive began to wane once more, replaced by the grim realization that even if she had won the battle against Finch, the war against the wilderness might have claimed her nonetheless. The physical and psychological trauma of her 10-year ordeal, coupled with the immediate aftermath of a violent killing, would have left her profoundly vulnerable. The park rangers and volunteers, many of whom had participated in the original search a decade prior, felt a renewed sense of urgency, a desperate need to complete Evelyn's story, to bring closure to a saga that had haunted the very essence of the park. It was during this exhaustive, almost desperate phase of the search that a final, crucial piece of evidence was unearthed, far from the immediate vicinity of Evelyn's cabin or Finch's makeshift camp. Approximately 5 miles downstream from Finch's burial site, near a particularly treacherous section of rapids where the water churned violently over ancient rocks, a small, worn backpack was discovered, snagged on a submerged log. It was waterlogged and covered in algae, but its contents, though severely degraded, provided the conclusive, heartbreaking answers. Inside the backpack, among a few rotted provisions and a compass that no longer pointed north, was a small, waterproof pouch. And within that pouch, carefully preserved despite the years and the elements, was Evelyn Reed's driver's license, along with a few faded, mud-stained photographs of her family. There was also a final, almost illegible, journal entry, scrawled on a single, torn page, distinct from the larger notebook found in her cabin. This last entry, barely decipherable, spoke of a desperate flight, a surge of adrenaline, and an overwhelming, all-consuming desire to escape. It mentioned the river, the only clear path out of the dense undergrowth, a route she hoped would carry her to civilization. But the words were fractured, a testament to her exhaustion and profound emotional distress. The final sentence, almost a whisper on the page, simply read, "Free, but alone. The current, too strong." This discovery, while confirming the tragic end to Evelyn's arduous journey, also validated her courage and her unimaginable will to survive. She had not only endured 10 years of extreme isolation and terror, but had also confronted her tormentor and emerged victorious, only to be claimed by the unforgiving forces of nature in her desperate bid for freedom. The backpack, snagged in the treacherous rapids, was a grim marker of her last valiant effort. The investigators, though heartbroken by the confirmation of her death, felt a profound sense of closure. Evelyn Reed's story was no longer a mystery swallowed by the redwoods. It was a harrowing epic of survival, a testament to the darkest corners of human depravity and the unbreakable spirit of a young woman who had fought against impossible odds. Her remains were never recovered, carried away by the relentless river, becoming one with the ancient landscape she had both endured and conquered. But her story, pieced together from a crude cabin, a disturbed burial, and a final, desperate journal entry, became a legend whispered among the colossal trees, a poignant reminder of the profound secrets the Redwood National Park held within its silent, majestic embrace. The redwoods, silent witnesses to her decade of terror, now stood as a silent monument to her extraordinary, tragic courage. Her disappearance, once a haunting, unsolved case, transformed into a powerful narrative of resilience, a chilling, true crime story forever etched into the lore of the ancient forest. The tale of Evelyn Reed once a mere statistic in the vast archive of missing persons, now stood as a harrowing epic, meticulously reconstructed from the silent whispers of the ancient redwoods. The full, brutal narrative of her decade-long struggle for survival, her terrifying entanglement with Art Finch, and her ultimate tragic bid for freedom was finally brought into the light. It was a story that reshaped the very perception of the Redwood National Park, transforming its serene beauty into a backdrop for unimaginable human drama. The initial search, a desperate scramble to find a lost tourist, had devolved into a cold case, a faded memory for those who had poured their hearts into the search. Yet, the wilderness held its secrets with a stoic indifference, only to relinquish them, piece by agonizing piece, a decade later. The discovery of her tree cabin, a marvel of primitive ingenuity, had first ignited a fragile spark of hope, the belief that Evelyn had not only survived, but thrived in the unforgiving embrace of the forest, was almost miraculous. But the gradual unfolding of her journal entries revealed a far darker truth. Her survival was not in peaceful solitude, but in constant fear, under the shadow of an unseen menace. The paranoia detailed in her writings, initially attributed to the psychological toll of isolation, was vindicated by the discovery of Art Finch's makeshift camp. Finch, the disgraced ranger, the self-proclaimed survivalist, had not merely coexisted in the wilderness. He had become a predator, turning Evelyn's fight for life into his personal twisted spectacle. The unearthed grave, bearing Finch's skeletal remains, and the antique arrowhead, was the stark, grim punctuation mark to his reign of terror. It was proof of a violent confrontation, a moment of desperate defiance where Evelyn, pushed beyond human endurance, had fought back and against all odds emerged victorious. This act, born of pure, primal self-preservation, solidified her transformation from victim to a survivor capable of unimaginable resilience. The emotional weight of this revelation was profound. Investigators, who had long resigned themselves to a simple tragic accident, now grappled with the sheer horror of Evelyn's experience. Her story was not just one of getting lost. It was a saga of protracted psychological warfare, a testament to the darkest corners of the human psyche and the extraordinary lengths to which one individual would go to survive. The redwoods, once revered for their tranquility, now loomed with an almost sentient malevolence, their ancient bark silent witness to a brutal hidden conflict. The final heartbreaking discovery of her waterlogged backpack and the last desperate journal entry, caught in the rapids, brought a crushing sense of closure. It confirmed her ultimate fate. After vanquishing her human tormentor, Evelyn, in her desperate flight for freedom, had been claimed by the relentless power of the river. Her body, swept away by the churning current, was never recovered, becoming one with the vast, untamed wilderness she had battled for 10 long years. This was not the end Evelyn had envisioned, but it was an end, a resolution to a mystery that had haunted the park and its rangers for a decade. The fragmented narrative pieced together from her cabin, Finch's grave, and her final water-damaged words painted a complete picture. It was a story of a young woman who had walked into the wilderness seeking peace, only to find herself trapped in a living nightmare. Yet, even in her tragic end, Evelyn Reed left an indelible mark, a legacy of courage, a testament to the raw, unyielding power of the human spirit to endure, to adapt, and to fight against overwhelming odds. Her disappearance became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, forever changing the perception of the majestic yet profoundly indifferent Redwood National Park. The quiet groves, once symbols of untouched nature, now carried the heavy echoes of her struggle, her terror, and her ultimate valiant stand. The story of Evelyn Reed became a haunting reminder that even in the most serene corners of the world, unimaginable horrors can unfold, and the human spirit can be tested to its absolute breaking point, sometimes, tragically, beyond it. Years later, the legend of Evelyn Reed continued to resonate through the Redwood National Park, a spectral presence among the towering trees. Her story, though tragically concluded, etched itself into the very fabric of the wilderness, serving as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the extraordinary, often terrifying resilience of the human spirit. The official files on Evelyn Reed were eventually closed, marked with a grim finality, but her narrative continued to evolve in the collective consciousness of those who knew the park. It was whispered among park rangers during their solitary patrols, recounted by seasoned volunteers to wide-eyed newcomers, and even became a macabre focal point for urban legends circulating among thrill-seeking hikers. The image of a young woman, lost and then found through her own harrowing chronicle, battling not just nature but a deranged human predator, had become an inseparable part of the Redwoods lore. The tree cabin, Evelyn's decade-long sanctuary, was eventually dismantled by park authorities, not out of disrespect, but to prevent it from becoming a morbid pilgrimage site. Yet, the memory of its existence, nestled within the roots of that colossal redwood, persisted. Rangers often noted that certain groves, particularly those in the remote section where Evelyn had endured her ordeal, carried a different kind of silence now. It was a silence that felt heavier, imbued with the unspoken echoes of struggle and fear, a stark contrast to the once pure tranquility. The figure of Art Finch, the disgraced ranger turned wilderness predator, also found his place in this dark lore. His story served as a chilling reminder of the fragility of sanity and how the profound isolation of the wild could warp the human mind into something monstrous. His intimate knowledge of the redwoods, once an asset, became the very tool of his depravity, enabling him to stalk Evelyn with an almost supernatural stealth. The antique arrowhead, the crude weapon of his demise, was carefully catalogued as evidence, a tangible artifact of a violent, primitive end to a modern horror story. It stood as a stark symbol of the brutal, no-rules struggle for survival that had unfolded between Evelyn and Finch. The rapids, where Evelyn's backpack was found, became known as a place of somber reflection for those familiar with her story. The relentless churning of the water, once a symbol of the river's raw power, now seemed to murmur Evelyn's final, desperate attempt at freedom. Though her body was never recovered, lost to the depths and currents, her spirit was believed by some to linger, carried by the mist that often enveloped the ancient forest, a silent guardian against unseen evils. The investigation into Evelyn's disappearance and the subsequent revelations had lasting impacts. Park protocols for solo hikers in remote areas were reviewed and updated, emphasizing the importance of satellite communication devices and strict check-in procedures. There was a renewed appreciation for the inherent dangers of even the most beautiful wilderness, and a sober understanding that sometimes the greatest threats were not from nature itself, but from the dark corners of the human heart that nature could conceal. The story of Evelyn Reed was often contrasted with other tales of wilderness survival, but hers always stood apart. It wasn't just about enduring the elements. It was about enduring a psychological siege, about fighting a war in the profound silence of nature's grandest stage. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about isolation, mental deterioration, and the thin line between hunter and hunted. Ultimately, Evelyn Reed's 10 years in the Redwood National Park became a narrative of immense scale, a vast, ancient landscape bearing witness to a deeply personal, terrifying struggle. Her courage, her desperation, her ingenuity, and her ultimate poignant end resonated far beyond the boundaries of the forest. She became a symbol of humanity's enduring will, even when confronted with the most horrific circumstances, forever binding her name to the timeless, majestic, and now undeniably haunted redwood giants. The wind sighing through the canopy, the dappled light filtering through the branches, the profound ancient silence, all seemed to carry the echoes of her story, ensuring that Evelyn Reed would never truly be lost again.